2009 was a crazy time for movie titles. In '01 you had Final Destination, you had The Fast and the Furious. In 2009 you had just Fast and Furious, and The Final Destination. Both were the fourth entries in their respective franchises, but Fast got the idea the was holding it back, while Final figured the was the missing ingredient. It does give the movie an air of finality. Like, this isn't just another one, this is it. This is the Final Destination. The opening credits even reference deaths from past movies by rendering them in X-ray vision, like ladder through the eye, clothesline around the neck, and more. Referencing the past movies further makes this one feel like a culmination. That was the original intent. This was meant to be the grand finale. And if that's the case, you expect it to do something a little different, go out with a bang. I'd say we'll be the judge of that, but it won't be us judging the movie. Instead, it'll be a critic harsher than death itself. The ruthless, unrelenting, and unbiased ranking algorithm. My mission with this channel is simple: rank every movie ever made one at a time. I do this using a scientific approach. I recap the movie, and as I go, the rankometer will appear to add or subtract points whenever the movie does something good or bad. By the end, we'll have a precise score to see how this movie stacks up against all the rest. Now it's time for the Final Destination. Nothing better than a nice sunny day at McKinley Speedway, seated in section 180. Sure, McKinley is the name of the school with those kids who died 3 years ago on the Devil's Flight, except the ones who got off the coaster only to die in freak accidents later, and 180 is the flight number for the plane that crashed 8 years ago, killing everyone except a few people who left before the plane took off only to die later on in freak accidents. Yup, it's a perfect day to die. Nick O'Bannon feels the cold fingers of death on his shoulder before it happens. The reason we all watch racing: the crashes. Tires, cars, and parts of cars fly into the crowd. People die, until Nick wakes up back on the bleachers. None of it really happened. Not yet, anyway. It was a vision, a premonition. Nick warns his friends. They leave, a handful of others follow. Then, the crash. Nick was right, and he just saved their lives. For now. So, it's the fourth and at the time what was intended to be the final movie in the franchise. Has it found a way to reinvent itself, try something new? Too early to say, but so far it seems like the main lesson learned is people like to watch people die, so let's get to that fast. Also, none of the character arcs really worked in the previous movies, so let's just stop bothering with any of that. The characters here are especially bland, with virtually zero character traits, other than Hunt, who is the quintessential jerk. One thing that sometimes worked for these movies, especially the first, is setting that anxious and paranoid mood. They jettison that too. So the only thing the opening of this movie has going for it is the X-ray stuff. That was kinda cool. And the accident itself, which wasn't. It's just a really bland way to kill people, especially when it's just large objects flying at them over and over. There's nothing visually interesting about it. More like there's a person and then bam, there's no longer a person. Instead, there's a big slab of concrete. So that's why this movie currently has this score. You know, actually that's unfair. This movie does add something new. It's in 3D now. After surviving the McKinley Speedway crash, Nick and his friends are rattled. Except Hunt, he's cool as a cucumber. He doesn't even join them at the memorial because why should he care about those people?
People didn't have a Dr. Xavier with them to tell them to get out of the way. People didn't have one of these. Go ahead, Janet. Kiss it. It's your choice, heads or tails, but you know I like head.
The night of the memorial, Nick has a nightmare of seemingly random images. A red door, a cross, a chain, an explosion. What does it all mean? Soon he'll learn it's a premonition, because that same night, racist Carter Daniels decides to take revenge on George, McKinley Speedway security guard. Carter blames him for his wife's death, because she was still inside when the crash happened, but George wouldn't let him go back for her. Carter arrives at George's house with grand plans to burn a cross in his yard. But instead, Carter ends up in flames himself, dragged by his own truck, and finally after the explosion, no cross burning on George's lawn, but instead Carter's own decapitated head. This scene starts to shed some light on the movie's strategy because there are a couple of approaches you often see in horror. One, make us care about characters and build tension around the question of whether or not they'll survive. Option 2, make us hate characters so we take sadistic pleasure or laugh at the ridiculous ways they die. This movie seems to opt for option 2, at least to start, because Carter is a racist a-hole, and it's funny to see the ironic way he dies. It comes off like it's all happening due to his total incompetence. I like to imagine Death actually didn't have any role in this. He just watched Carter totally bungle the plan and end up dragged by his own truck, so Death just sat back like, you know what? I don't even need to do anything. This guy's gonna end up dead all on his own. Now, aside from the actual deaths, the other fun of these movies is the signs. Characters have to pay attention to the signs to figure out how people will die, so they can intervene. It's fun for the audience too, because it gives you something to look forward to. Like in Final Destination 2, when Kimberly sees the reflection of phantom pigeons, you're left to wonder, how the hell are pigeons going to figure into the next death? In 3, the signs got less interesting because they were sequestered to photos. Characters no longer had to be paranoid at all times and pay attention to the slightest oddity, but at least you still had to look at the photos and try to figure out what it all means. This movie makes the signs even less interesting by turning them into visions filled with lethal objects that'll figure into the deaths. Likely because these visions allow for objects to fly around the screen in glorious 3D, these are way less interesting. The visions, like I said, are usually filled with objects where it's not hard to imagine how they could be lethal. So unlike pigeons or Man with Hooks, there's little to wonder about, just the particular mechanics of how it'll go. And you're not paranoid or on the lookout for clues. You're just waiting for the next vision to appear. Also, if the movie isn't going to develop the characters, then the moments where it tries to throw the audience a character development bone really stick out as not nearly enough. Like, look, George is reading a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. That doesn't count. That'd be like in the first episode of Breaking Bad, having Walter White reading a book called Overcompensating for a Fragile Ego. It's the definition of telling instead of showing. The next morning, the news reports on Carter's death, and Nick recognizes elements of the accident from his nightmare. That's how he realizes that he's still getting visions. And just then, he gets another one. Scissors, a guy smoking, a rock, a woman's eye. On cue, a couple of dumb kids throw rocks at a guy smoking before he mows the lawn. Their mother, Speedway survivor Samantha, gets her hair done, has a few near misses with a malfunctioning chair and a loose ceiling fan. Before she steps outside, lawnmower runs over rock, rock flies through eye, and Samantha Lane is no more. There's a fun element to this scene with the usual red herrings, the chair that keeps dropping while Samantha is in the vicinity of sharp objects, like scissors or whatever you call the thing you use to scrape under your toenails. Ew. And bonus points that the red herring isn't water on a plug, because that's getting old. And more bonus points. It's Francesca from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I guess subjectively that doesn't make the movie better, so no Rankometer points, but it is bonus points in my book. After Samantha's death, Hunt says what everyone is thinking.
We just lost a really hot MILF.
Why do they keep inviting him to these meetings? Though something tells me that won't be a problem for much longer, because Nick has been doing his research, and he found out this has happened before. People survive an accident thanks to a vision, before death comes for them one by one in the order they were supposed to die. Janet, who is apparently a genius, puts the pieces together.
But we survived, so now does that mean we all die?
Yeah, that's like the whole thing. Have you never seen one of these movies before? Freaked out by it all, Janet storms out, and Hunt leaves too because, well, he's a cool guy. Time to get laid, baby. Then another vision, a cutting torch, cable, and oxygen tank. But who will be the victim this time? Nick has to remember the order in which people died. So he and his girlfriend Lori head to the racetrack. They walk around. George lets them watch security footage. And Nick remembers the order. Thrilling stuff. So next to die will be the mechanic. He's sad because his wife died in the accident and now he has survivor's guilt. George can relate because he got his own wife and daughter killed by driving drunk. Character development. Then an oxygen tank launches at the mechanic, pushing him into the fence where his body is cut to pieces. There's something really satisfying about watching his body mashed into the fence and cut into a bunch of equal-sized pieces, just in the way that patterns are satisfying in general. Otherwise, at this point, you really start to feel how the franchise has run out of steam. The first movie had a novelty to it, learning what happens when you cheat death, learning the rules like how you die in the same order you would have died, learning what happens when you intervene. This movie repeats all that, except it's no longer a novelty. It has absolutely nothing to add. Except 3D. This is the third time now we've had to watch characters look up Flight 180 online and relearn all this information. At least 2 tried something new by having the characters die in reverse order. We even have the characters wonder, hey, if we intervene and save one of us, maybe we'll all be saved. The audacity to repeat that same plotline yet again, when we all know it won't save them. It just skips. 2 tried something different here too by introducing the new life defeats death rule. Also repetitive is the exchange with the mechanic. You're gonna die! No, I'm not. Damn it! I died. But yeah, the pattern of the fence cutting him, I don't know, it's oddly mesmerizing. The screenplay describes it as cubing his torso like ground beef through a Play-Doh fun factory. Next up is Janet and Hunt. They both died in the premonition simultaneously. So Nick will go after Hunt while Laurie and George go after Janet. They save her from nearly dying in a car wash, but Nick is too late to save Hunt from getting his inside sucked out by a pool drain through a particular orifice. At this point, the movie continues the trend of killing characters we don't care about, and in fact, strives for the opposite. It made us dislike Carter, racist, and Janet, pushy and overbearing. It does the same for Hunt, making him insensitive and overall annoying. At this point, the only thing you can do is make the deaths as creative and memorable as possible. Well, if you imagine seeing this movie and telling someone about it afterward, Hunt's death definitely makes for a good conversation piece. On the other hand, saving Janet was a pretty uninteresting scene. We don't care if she's saved or not, and there are hardly any obstacles for the other characters anyway. Just get in, grab her, and get out. No challenge at all. At least there was a fun Easter egg. Nick's vision of water is triggered when he sees the name of a company. Clear Rivers Water. Clear Rivers was of course a character in Final Destination and its sequel, making her the only character to appear in more than one movie, other than William Bloodworth. And seeing her name is a nice reminder that for a second reminds you of better movies. After Hunt's death, the characters celebrate. Alright, I might have left out some details. Let's start again. After Hunt's death, the others go home. Wind knocks over a glass of wine, highlighting a few words on a newspaper. Through action, they were saved. Nick and Laurie get the idea that by saving Janet, they destroy Death's list, saving them all. They run to give George the good news. And more good news. He's been trying to kill himself all day. That's not the good news part. He's been trying to kill himself all day, but it won't work. The car wouldn't start, he threw up the pills, and the noose he scotch taped to the ceiling couldn't get the job done. That must mean they really were saved. Now the characters celebrate. This is a pretty pivotal point of the movie. It's the climax of these characters' journeys. Nick finally listened to his visions in time for them to actually intervene and save someone. Now, they will be proven wrong, they weren't actually saved, but it should feel like the climax until they're proven wrong for the subversion to work. But this is all just so hard to take seriously. The way George's noose falls so easily, it comes off less like Death is intervening to save him, and more like he's just really bad at killing himself. It's just total incompetence, and the way he keeps the noose on for so long while they're talking. And then there's this. Over some celebratory glasses of apple cider, not champagne because remember, George is an alcoholic, character development. Laurie suggests a trip to Paris, haha. Then George runs out of the room to grab the cookies.
You only live once, right?
That's what I'm talking about. You get the cookies.
Does this strike you as a man who just spent an entire day trying to kill himself? These characters are so untraumatized by everything that's been happening. It rings so false. And then there's hollow dialogue about what they should do with their new leases on life. Their answers are completely generic.
I'm not going to take another day for granted. Maybe it's time to stop talking about doing stuff and actually start doing it.
What stuff? Nick doesn't have an answer because Nick isn't a real character, and the movie needs him to stop talking so we don't see how little of a character he is, so George butts in, "Shut up, let's have cookies." With Death seemingly defeated, Janet and Laurie head to the movies to see a 3D movie. 3D like this movie. But wait, there's a problem. After Hunt and Laurie, George was supposed to die, right? Wrong. Apparently there was another survivor, guy in cowboy hat. He wasn't on the news because at first he was unidentified, but now that they know his name, guy in cowboy hat, the family has been notified and his face is on the news. So the only reason George couldn't die is because it wasn't his turn yet. Nick gets George, they head to the hospital, and someone let a bathtub overflow. It crashes through the floor, crushing guy in cowboy hat to death. Outside, George gets a feeling of deja vu just before an ambulance runs him over. Guy in cowboy hat's death was boring. People getting crushed is generally less interesting, just like in the original accident, because visually it's just, there's a person, no, not anymore, now there's a large object in their place. And then George's death. They really do a disservice to this character. It goes from he can't figure out how to die to he can't even cross the street properly. It's not like the original Final Destination, where Terry was distracted during a heated argument and stormed off into the road without looking. George, on the other hand, he had no reason to be distracted. He just is really bad at being alive when he wants to be alive and bad at dying when he wants to die. With George dead, Laurie is next. Nick runs to the movie theater. He warns Laurie and Janet, but Janet doesn't believe him. Why would she? Who would believe such nonsense? But I bet she believes him a couple of minutes later when she dies impaled by a rod from the explosion from a construction mishap. Laurie, on the other hand, survives a little bit longer as she runs off with Nick, until she gets chewed up in the gears of an escalator. But it's just a vision. That means they still have a chance. Except George, he gets hit by the ambulance again. I told you, the guy doesn't know how to cross the road. This time, Nick takes a different approach. He tries to stop the construction mishap to begin with. Easier said than done. There's already a fire, but the fire alarm pull station doesn't work, and the extinguisher kind of does until the fire starts back up. Also, a nail gun falls and fires repeatedly into Nick's arm, pinning him to the wall. The fire approaches some barrels leaking flammable liquid. Nick thinks fast, grabs a long board, lights the tip on fire, and holds it up to set off the sprinkler system. Like that, the fire is out, Janet and Laurie are saved. And Laurie is Nick's girlfriend, so, stakes. Anyway, one place these movies struggle is with how much skepticism the characters should have. Of course, at first, who would believe death has a design and manipulates events to kill those who deviate? But once you've witnessed it firsthand and seen irrefutable proof your friend is basically psychic, at that point, skepticism puts the movie in stupid characters doing stupid things territory we often see in horror. Janet refusing to go when Nick shows up at the theater is dumb. But we're here to see crazy deaths, and they're always more effective when they touch on something we've thought about before, or a common fear. And how many times have you been told not to mess around on escalators? So Janet's death in what turns out to be a vision is one of the better examples in this movie. There's also an element of surprise, because you don't expect it to be a vision, not this late in the movie, and not when Nick does so much. Drive to the mall, get Laurie, go on the run. Typically the visions don't get that in depth, though it doesn't get a ton of points because it also feels kind of random. Why does he get a full-on vision now, where he's an active participant, versus other times when the visions are just jumbled up 3D images? Once Nick is out of the vision, there's finally some genuine tension watching him try to save Laurie and Janet. It isn't like the first time they saved Janet, where it's run into the car wash, grab her, and get out. Here, there are real obstacles. Nick has to use problem-solving skills, endure some pain, and figure a way out. Now, let's see how it all wraps up. Nick, Janet, and Laurie all die in a cafe. Oh, so their idea for what was meant to be the final scene in the franchise was the same ending as 3 and 1. You thought they got away, but death hasn't forgotten about them after all. Except nobody watching this movie thought they got away, because there's no reason to think they did. Intervening means death skips. If it gets to the end of the list, it starts over. We already know that. So here's the final score. The Final Destination takes 3's place as the worst of the franchise so far. We still have Final Destination 5 up ahead, so stay tuned.